Today, I wanted to talk about an interesting subject, something that occurred to me, and it's around the topic of sadness, but it's not a sad talk, I hope. And I wanted to just take a different perspective on it. And why am I speaking about sadness? Well, there's obviously, in the position I'm in, I deal with counseling people. And at this time, because of the pandemic and so many changes going on in the world, that some people have encountered tragedies. Perhaps everybody knows somebody that's had a difficult time. And how do you counsel somebody that is suffering and they're sad? And sometimes we hear this saying, and I've used it many times: a sad saint is a sad saint indeed. And sometimes people think, oh gosh, I'm sad and that's something wrong with me. And that's not good. That's not a spiritual attitude to have. And I don't know if that's really true or not. Sadness is a human emotion that all of us figure at some time or another to find ourselves going through. I mean, I can't imagine that a person who has a human heart doesn't, and human emotions doesn't at some point or another encounter sad times. Look at the life of Master. If you read his life in the autobiography of a yogi, he went through great trial and tribulation. Think of when he was a boy, how his mother passed, his mother died, and he expresses how that was let's say, a formative period of his life. And he went through a long period of sadness, feeling that sadness. But it's an interesting thing about a man such as Master, who is an avatar, that they live on multiple levels, it seems. I remember there's a story of Master as a boy when he and his brother Sananda were in the neighborhood, out later than they had told their father they would be home. But so it was in the evening, and they were climbing in a neighborhood tree, picking lychee fruit, enjoying lychee fruit of somebody else's tree, I guess. And but they were just being kids. And they saw a light in the distance, and there was a man in the midst of that light coming toward them in the neighborhood. And Sananda tells this story, and then how they got down and went to that light, and Master bowed at the feet of the person that seemed to be surrounded by light and began talking with him. And that person was telling Master, remember why you've come here. Remember, you must not forget. And he was admonishing him a little bit, and just but in a loving tone. And Sananda didn't quite know, being the younger brother, didn't quite know what to make of that. But eventually they made it home. Their father was out, so didn't notice that they were coming home late. And Sananda looked on the wall and saw the picture of their father's guru, was Lahiri Mahashai. And he recognized immediately that was who appeared to them and was talking to his elder brother, Mukunda Yogananda, as a boy, telling him, don't forget your purpose here, why you're here. And it's interesting as an example of how it's seemingly a great master like that lived on a couple of different levels. On the one hand, it's a mystery, isn't it? They have to go, they're in this body, they're living this life as doing the human emotions of everybody, just like everybody. But on another level, they're above it all. They're, in Master's case, he came in as a liberated soul. But you might say he puts that on the shelf to live a normal life. But I think it's that story the story of his passing of his mother and the great grief that he felt for that tells us something. There's a message there that he lived on this multiple levels, but so too do we live on a multiple level at one time, and at one time or another. And have you ever noticed that in your own life, that you sort of are on two levels at the same time? Something is happening and you're engaged in it, but there's another part of yourself that's somewhat removed from it, watching this happen, and you're seeing yourself play a part as if you're a part in this movie that's going on. And there's this dichotomy about the observer that's observing everything that's happening and the actor that's engaged in the day-to-day. And those two are there. to some degree. I notice this in myself. They're always there. And sometimes you're more in one. And I think when we meditate, we tend to retreat more into the self, go into the self, come out, as Master would say, to engage in day-to-day activities, and then go back into that self. And I think sadness is like that. We come out into the world to engage. And Master came out and he engaged and he experienced the normal emotions that all of us do. And he engaged, and then there's sadness as part of those emotions. And we're seeing that in many of us, some of us, in close hand at the situation in the world today. But whether there's a pandemic or not, this applies because everybody inevitably experiences tragedy. There's that story of the woman who went to Buddha, her child had died. And she went to the Buddha and prayed the Buddha return her child to life. She was in such terrible grief. And the Buddha said, yes, he would. He would grant her wish. But first she must do something. She must go travel the land and find a household that has not experienced grief. And so she said, okay. And she went, roamed from household to household until finally she came back to the Buddha and said, no, sir, I understand. She was able to not find any household that had not experienced grief, not experienced sadness, because death and parting and tragedies on the daily basis are part of life. And I think we're reminded in sadness, the sadness over things, people. You look back over the last year, a year's been lost in some fashion. Traditions are perhaps been overlooked, opportunities that might have been lost, and we can feel sad about those things. And it reminds us of the impermanence of this world. We take it on a philosophical way and say, yes, this life is always changing, and it's a condition of life, and sadness is part of that. So a person who is never sad, been very sheltered, like the Buddha. Of course, his parents tried to shelter him from the hardships of life, but eventually they could not do that. And he encountered them, and he decided he wanted to overcome and find the solution to suffering in this world. And so the fact that sadness exists and difficulties exist can be a motivation for us. And it's something that we can take to help us actually pursue our life on a deeper, on the spiritual life. Assuming, of course, the difficulty is that sometimes you can take sadness, which is a human emotion, and you can substitute other emotions too. You take them too far in one direction and they become self-destructive. Sadness, of course, can lead to despair. But you take them on you sort of look at yourself from this higher side of yourself in a philosophical sense. You can use that feeling to actually stimulate yourself in the spiritual path. And there's not really, I don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel guilty that, oh, I'm just wallowing in the sadness. If you have that little tinge, you might say, of that guilt feeling, well, then use that. Say, well, I want to do something about it. And typically, one of the things that sadness can do is it leads us to compassion. It leads us to empathy. See, now sadness, if it just focuses on ourself, I'm sad, my problems, my difficulties, then it becomes self-absorbing. And that can be a dangerous thing, because too much of that, you become self-absorbed to the point of being in depression with just self-focus. But if you use it in the right way, and you think of your human condition, you're part of humanity, and you begin to think of others, and you feel empathy for others, and you feel compassion for others. I feel sad, but other people feel sad too. And you begin to relate. You could say your world, small world of yourself, you begin to relate to the other people. And it brings one a sense of humanity and bonding to a larger reality beyond ourselves. And you could say, isn't it true sometimes hardship experience with other people knits, at least it can. It doesn't necessarily, it can drive us apart, but it can knit us to other people because we have now something in common. And it brings us into a common bond. You notice this sometimes at funerals. People come to funerals, they come at a moment of grief, particularly for the person who's lost somebody. But we go to the funeral probably because we know this person or know the family. So we feel a little bit of grief, also in that way. But it binds people. We share, you might say, our commonality as human beings. Our commonality is souls who are all looking for happiness, but yet all of us together have to face these realities of life. And so there's a certain bonding that takes place when that happens. I was thinking about this because I read a book recently. And actually, I made a little 5-minute video for a shish about this. But I realized 5 minutes wasn't enough to speak about it. But it was a book by fellows, conversations with two great souls, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, Archbishop from South Africa, who went through great struggle during the apartheid period there, and came out of it. I was a spiritual leader in a positive way, and there's an interesting passage there in that book about grief and sadness, and approached properly, that both of them can lead to a deeper sense of self-purpose. Now, I thought that was interesting, because when we lose someone, we can think of it. And if you happen to have lost somebody, you think of that person in their highest qualities, not in their foibles, but of their highest qualities. And everybody has some higher qualities to them. And that way we bless those people. But you could also dedicate yourself, if that person was close to you, dedicate yourself to fulfilling the ideals that person, if they loved you, wished for you. Like, let's say a mother or father or elder of some form, they had ideals for their children to become better people, perhaps, or in some fashion, or you have your own ideals about yourself of wanting to make your parents proud of you or think well of you. And sadness is something that can be used to generate a deeper sense of dedication to those ideals of, you might say, making your parents proud of you. You could sort of say, if you're looking down upon me, I want you to remember that and do something on their behalf. And in a sense, this is actually quite helpful, because implicit in that thought is the understanding that souls do not die. Those who have passed, they haven't just, their body is gone, but their essence lives on. And this, of course, is our teachings, that we drop this physical frame, but yet the astral body remains. And when circumstances are right, love brings that person back into connection with people with whom they have karma, you could say. So we all meet again one time or another. Consciousness and cannot be destroyed. Energy cannot be destroyed. It just changes form. And so consequently, this sense of dedication that can be enlivened, sense of dedication toward ideals, toward empathy toward other people, sense of generosity is stimulated. Oftentimes people will be more generous. These are positive ways to give expression to one's feelings. And in the process of those, like it should, grief passes, sadness passes, and we become, you might say, maybe we become a little bit philosophical about it. And I think this is a principle, not just when some person passes, and that created sadness, but this sense of principle of dedication, or taking that philosophical view and seeing your commonality, applies also when there's any failure or disappointment in life. It's good to remember that anytime something has gone wrong, some disaster maybe has happened, you've stumbled, it's not the end of the story. It's only, you might say, the closing of one chapter of our life, and perhaps the opening of a new one. And so we can, when a new chapter starts, we determine, okay, I'm going to get up. I haven't succeeded yet, perhaps, or whatever it is that perhaps you're disappointed about. You start again. And so consequently, we look from our own human experience, and obviously, if you've lived a little bit of a longer life, you can look back and you can see all of these waves of up and downs. And sometimes it's in the middle of those down periods that you learned the lessons that are going to carry you into the next phase of whatever that phase is in life. But I think also for me, I don't know, I think all of us are philosophical to some degree, but I find that in moments of sadness, or maybe melancholy might be a good word also, you're sort of like rueful looking back, well, that didn't work, and everything passes, nothing stays the same in life. We tend to want to block those thoughts out. Oh, those are depressing thoughts. I don't want to think about that. But I'm not sure if blocking those out is actually spiritually healthy for us. I think it's healthy to look at those aspects of life, of that disappointment is there. In every rose bush, there's the thorns. To see things in proportion, not to wallow in them or to always be gloomy about them, but to understand and use them. Yes, and that's why I need to find a stronger, more enduring foundation to this life, so that when those things come, I can maintain that sense of proportion. And I think that's what it is, in proportion. We have these two sides, the sides that engages in the world and goes through the ups and downs, and that other side that's a little bit behind, just watching it, that silent watcher, and then standing back, not in coldness. That's one way people overcome despair or sadness or disappointment, is they just become cold. And you can see that they haven't learned their lesson. If they become cynical, that's another one. You don't want to do that. But philosophical, in a sense, okay, that because this world is, you might say, inducive of a philosophical watching of it, because everything's going to pass. Now, one thing to be aware of, or to be wary of, let's say in that way, is sadness can, as I said, the negative side of it can begin to go into despair. And one of the things that comes from that is you begin to lose hope. And that's inimical to our spiritual welfare, to lose hope, because it's hope, and I probably have mentioned this somewhere in one of these classes, is hope is that light that keeps us moving forward. But if sadness comes and you allow it to fester and linger, it can lead into a lack of hope, or you might say a sense of resignation. Oh, there's nothing I can do about it. Now, what is resignation? Well, it's energy goes out of us, like the balloon just deflates, and you're resigned, and you lose that impetus to pick up the tools and get back to work. And you're just resigned to the fact that you're there at the bottom. Now, when we hit a low point in life, sometimes we do have to pause. But if we know, all of us know, that if you just stay there, that's no good. You're just going to wallow in that despair and that low point. And then you're in, because life won't allow that, because it's not our true nature. Then what happens is Divine Mother comes and might give us a poke, or electric shock to get us moving. Something has to get us moving again. And so take the initiative. And so when you're down, uh, hope, kindle that, because hope is that light. And you say, okay, I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if there's something better, but I sure hope it is. And you use that as that light to get you moving again. And the thing about hope, where some people are wary of it, is that hope demands a certain amount of risk. And that's the risk of being disappointed. My hopes were dashed. Have you ever said that? My hopes were dashed. You were disappointed. And so what happens is, now how am I going to fix that? Well, I'm not going to hope for anything. And because that way I won't be disappointed. Well, we know that that's not a very good way to go about it. So in a sense, hope demands a certain risk. And we have to live life with a little bit of risk. And that implies vulnerability. And we can see some people don't want to be vulnerable. I've loved, and my love was I was disappointed in love. I was disappointed in this. I tried that, and I'm not going to do it again. We can't live like that, and Divine Mother will not allow us to live like that. So we have to use our own initiative to light that lamp of hope, a little spark, hope for a better day. And hope demands faith. But hope also, remember this, if you're feeling a little bit hopeless at times, one of the things that nourishes hope, one, you can remember past times, yes. Well, there were, yes, you remember times when it was dashed, but there's also times when it was fulfilled. But hope is nurtured by faith, but it's also nurtured by community. So this is, we're taught on the spiritual path to cultivate satsang, because satsang is very helpful to us and inspire us. But also, hope brings us into, or cultivating satsang brings us into community with other people. And it reminds us that everybody has faced trials. Everybody has faced difficulties. Everybody has faced low times and high times, because that's life. And placing ourselves physically in community in a community of hopeful people, a community, spiritual, uplifting people, is one of the best ways to get ourselves out of a feeling of sadness, one of a feeling of despair, or hopelessness, or any of those negative emotions. If you place yourself not with the idea of bringing other people into your orbit, but with the idea of helping yourself to be able to rise up a little bit above your present state. And then, that feels better than where I was. And then you make that your baseline. Then you can keep raising it up and up. Your attitude and your joy level begins to be raised. And if you can't do that physically, we can always put ourselves in satsang mentally, in the company of the saints, company of great ones, in the company of aspiring people, mentally surrounding yourself when you meditate, reading the books of other people. There's many ways, all listening to things that are uplifting to you. Whatever you need to do, surround yourself in a positive vibration, in company with other people in that way. And you could say one of the markers to see if you're going in the right direction or not is, if you're sad, are you thinking about other people, or are you thinking too much about yourself? Now, because see, sadness has its vortex of magnetism. It pulls you in to I am sad, I am this, I am this. And that vortex, you have to consciously put some energy to dissipate that, to be able to, and one way is to think about other people. And so this is why so often we give an exercise such as this. In times of difficulty, when you're meditating, concentrate, get yourself calm, sit still. And during your meditation, once you're calm, concentrate upon the heart and to feel, try to feel, keeping your eyes up, try to feel here at the heart. And you can even place, I notice I instinctively put my hand here. You can even, while you're meditating, put your hand there and feel while you're meditating and feel the energy there in the heart and try to make it calm. Try to make it still, make it peaceful. And then once you're in that point, don't start thinking about your own situation, but think of somebody else who is suffering, who is perhaps feeling sad, somebody's had a loss in their life. And then try to notice as you're thinking about that person and as you're here, try to mentally feel a sense of warmth here at the heart or a sense of caring at the heart. But sometimes you actually feel that in the tactily as a sense of warmth there, and reflect that just like you, that other person wants to be happy. That person wants to be free from suffering. They want to be in a sense of joy, just like you do. And you can and feel a sense of bond with that other person and silently offer up a prayer to that person. May you be happy. May you be well. May you be healthy. May you feel peace. May you feel joy. And allow those feelings of empathy, those feelings of compassion, allow them to flow from you out to that other person. And if you can do this, I'd say just for 5 minutes, that flowing out from you to another person, it draws, as you put something out, you create a little vacuum in yourself, you might think, and it draws those feelings that you have expressed out toward others and shared with others. It draws those feelings into you, and it takes the place of that sense of sadness or despair or whatever else might have been there. And use this as for whatever, if you ever have negative emotions of some sort, you can modify this to be able to reach out to others. But think of the masters too. Master was very sad when his mom died. And he even says that whenever a tragedy struck like that, at the death of a dear one in his life, Divine Mother always seemed to arrange it so he was not there. His brother, his sister, his good disciples, because it was time for them to go. And Master had that impulse. He was a man of great heart. He was Avatar too, but he's a man of great heart, feeling humanity. And it was natural. He said, Master, Divine Mother knew that he would argue with her too much. And so she's conveniently arranged for him not to be there. But that humanity is part of who we are as well. And so don't deny it. But at the same time, remember, he was a great master. He watched that side of himself. He observed it. He played the part well. He played it to a high octave, and those emotions, he then was empathetic and turned that feeling into something larger and greater that brought out that greatness of soul that he had within himself. And I think it allowed people to relate to him that, yes, he wasn't removed. And it's the same thing for us. I think in the sense if we turn these situations into something positive, it brings out that heart quality in ourselves to transform or to transmute those energies that tend to take us into self-absorption, and they bring us into sense of communion with other people, and eventually, of course, with other people, we see our commonality with everybody, that God is in everybody, God is shining in everybody. And so it unifies us, one with other people. And in this way, we can be of service to others, but also underneath it all, we're ultimately doing service to ourselves. And we begin to feel God's joy coming in as that sadness goes away from us. So try it and see. It's not so. Joy to all of you.